Hey everybody, and welcome to the end. Well, it's the beginning of the process for the color chart that you see here. And while this is the end, we actually need to go back to the real beginning to see the process and to figure out how to get to this point here. So let's do that. Looking back on that grid, you'll notice that there are 64 shapes. Here, as you can see, I'm beginning in basically the middle of the page with a circle-ish shape that are, somewhere around an inch in diameter. And I actually had to go through this several times with an eraser to get my practice in so that I would be able to fit 8 shapes across this 9 by 12 piece of paper. This is actually real life pace right here, and it's a perfect time to practice that patience because it does indeed make a difference. Using that first row as a guide, continue by working both above and below that row. Essentially what you're doing is you're aiming for this grid so that you have columns that are vertical, rows that are horizontal, that all line up together. Nothing should be shifting or leaning or angling in any sort of direction. Also notice that there's a tiny space in between each shape. So not only are the shapes from left to right not touching, but also from top to bottom, they're not touching either. Somewhere around that halfway point, you'll really start to see this come together as a grid. And while again, we're not striving for perfection here, we do want to make it as solid as possible. And this practice of patience, even with imperfection, is actually a really good skill in and of itself. Beginning in the upper left-hand corner, take that first shape and draw a diagonal line through it to create 2 halves. And you'll do this with each one of the shapes where the column and the row intersects all the way down to the bottom right. Finally, as the last prep stage before we actually begin painting, let's label where every color is going to go, not just across the top of each column, but also down the left of each row, and just set it up in the same way that the colors come in the watercolor pan. Red, orange, yellow, green, BL for blue, V for violet, BR for brown, and BK for black. And after all of that prep work, we're finally ready for step number 1 in the painting process of this color chart. Actually, don't forget, and you'll need this every time you get your paints out. You're going to want some scrap paper in order to test out your color and your value, and paper towels. Don't forget the paper towels. Step number 1 in the process is using pure hue straight from the watercolor pans. Now this goes in those diagonal shapes, and you're only filling the bottom half of those shapes where you had drawn that diagonal line previously. This is where red and red intersect, pretty easy to see here. Next, we will get where orange and orange go together. So there's no color mixing yet. We just have to make sure that as we do this, we get enough water in order to be able to paint, but it's not too light in value. And that's one of the reasons why we have this tester paper here over on the side. And it's really important that you paint the bottom half of this diagonal row first. And now for step 2 of the painting process. Actually, before we start changing the values of our pure hues, which we have here that's dry at this point. This is a reminder so that the bottom half of this exercise or worksheet is going to be a darker value than the top half. It's a mirror image. It's just a mirror image across this diagonal so that everything on the top is just a lighter version of whatever it is that's on the bottom. And just as a gentle reminder, if you want a lighter value, just add more water. And now for actual step 2 of the painting process. We're going to take our pure hues again and test out the value after we add some water to it on our palette and just make sure that it's light enough. At the same time though, a common problem or mistake is that there's actually too much water in the brush along with the pigment, and it's hard to control and it leaves an uneven application. So in addition to testing my hues out on my scrap paper, I'm also using that paper towel in order to help get the even application of paint. And now, once we have some clean water and a clean piece of scrap paper, we're ready for step 3. And now we get to start mixing colors, starting from the outside and working in. We will take a combination of column and row to see what we're supposed to mix together. So we'll start with red mixed with each color along the bottom or along the left and then along the top. Darker and lighter values, the same with orange on the column and row. So as we begin to mix red and orange together, or red and yellow together, we want to pay attention that there's a darker value on the bottom and a lighter value on top. A darker red-orange on the bottom, a lighter red-orange along the top. Red-green here, lighter red-green over here, etc. Now, I have to mention the importance of color mixing. Make sure you're paying attention and testing out the colors. So red and yellow gives you orange. It doesn't matter if it's dark or light, it still needs to be orange, which may be different than that orange that you see there, but it's still as close as possible. Red and green should be some sort of a neutral gray, and then when you get down to red and blue, make sure you're getting a violet. Always check your colors. And especially when you get to colors like blue and orange, which need to be a neutral brown, or violet and yellow, which again need to be a neutral brown. And you'll get some more atypical color mixes that you wouldn't necessarily initially have thought of, like violet and green. A super beautiful color, but not as frequently used. Oh, and also note that whenever you're using yellow, you probably need a little bit more of that than your other colors, because that hue isn't very strong. And with our red and orange, make sure that you paint the bottom portion of this worksheet first so that you have a darker value to start with. Test out your colors, make sure you get an even application and your edges are nice and clean, and then you just add more water to your palette for the lighter value which goes along the top. Moving on to that red and yellow mix, which is orange, making sure you test out your color and your value, and you put it in this circle down here. Now, what I'm noticing is that that's not quite as dark as I would like it to be. So what I'll do is I will paint the lighter value with some more water in the top half, and then once this dries, I'll come back and add a second coat to it so that it is a darker value. Now for my red and green, that is too green. It's not gray. So retest out your color and make sure that you get it in the shape. And what I'm noticing is this is the second one in a row where it's not as dark as I would like it to be. So again, I will paint the top half, make sure it is a lighter value still. Then I will clean out my brush, I'll get some fresh water, and I'll add a second coat to that red-green gray mixture that's on the bottom. Now we'll continue to mix and test and paint and mix and test and mix and test, not just for color mixes, but also for value. And that's really what you'll see here is you'll start to see the palette get a lot dirtier. You'll see the scrap paper get a lot dirtier. You need to do it until it's right. The precision that you put in, especially in this first column and row, will start to make everything else fall in place and be a lot easier later on. And now we have our first column and our first row completed. Same colors, just different values as we go along those outer edges. Once we get a clean palette and we get some clean water, we'll start to work with our column and row of orange with yellow, yellow and green, etc., etc. Now the first, orange and yellow, should pretty much, again, make sense. When we get into our orange and green, it's probably some sort of a neutral brownish type hue. Obviously, when we get to orange and blue, that's going to be a neutral brown. And then from there, it moves fairly quickly with a lot of interesting, subtle variations using that orange. Again, dark values on the bottom, lighter values on the top. And we haven't gone very far, but we need some fresh water. And each one of the next column and row, again, darker on the bottom, lighter on top, our yellow-green, followed by our yellow-blue, which should be a green, and then yellow and violet, don't forget, that is going to give you a neutral brown. That yellow-black mixture, it's going to be kind of like a military army green. So just make note of that. Next, we will go with that green and blue combination, darker on the bottom, lighter on the top, and what you'll notice, there's a fresh palette, some fresh water, which you can't really see here, but also notice that each column and each row is getting shorter and shorter as we work towards the bottom right of this worksheet. It's another quick reminder that as you're mixing your colors and you're testing them out, make sure one doesn't overpower the other, especially when you get to violet, you get to black. It's really easy for one to be too dominant and to not even realize it until it's too late. Use as much test paper as you need, because once you get your paint on your color chart, you can't do anything with it except make it darker. And before you know it, brown and black being our last color and value combination of the worksheet. And you've done it! You've got your watercolor grid complete. 64 shapes, a mirror image on the bottom and the top, the darker half being a darker the bottom half being a darker value, the top half being a lighter value. You should be able to now have better control of your color mixing, better control of your value mixing, and also better control of just applying the paint with the brush that you have to the page. This should, as you make more things for yourself, help you to create more complex and sophisticated and visually interesting things. So take this, let it dry, clean up all of your stuff, go forth, make something interesting, and have fun.